To the person watching this, what are you like now? Did you become who you wanted to be? For starters, what was the person that you wanted to be even like? I don't know, but it would be wonderful if you can boast that you're living each day to its fullest. To the future MJ, from the MJ dreaming of the future. Everyone who likes video games always has that one game in their library that is particularly special to them. The first video game they ever owned, the first game of a specific genre, or the first game of a given series are all common examples of a personal, nostalgic, and special game. For me, there is one video game that manages to fit all three criteria. It was the first game that I ever owned. It was the first game that I ever played of the JRPG genre. And it was my first game of the highest grossing media series of all time. My incredibly special, personal, and nostalgic game is Pokémon X for the 3DS. It was what got me into Pokémon, and it was the start of what I consider the best generation of Pokémon in recent history. I didn't start this channel in time for Pokémon X's 10th anniversary, but I did start this channel in time to prep this video for my 10th anniversary for Pokémon X, and my 20th birthday. A generation of Pokémon is a 3-year period in between new original game releases. The generation will start with a completely original game, then the year after it will release either a second edition of the game or a remake of an older generation, and then the third year will release a major spin-off game. This video on Pokémon X will be the first in a 3-part series where I cover each major Pokémon game released from 2013 to 2015, aka the 6th generation of Pokémon. Throughout this video, I will be referring to Pokémon X and Y as just Pokémon X, because it's both shorter and more concise, while also referring to the specific edition of the game that I have played. With that, let's get into my favorite generation of Pokémon. Update. It is now the end of April. I am almost done editing this video that is somehow longer than the Emperor's New Groove, and I just want to make two things clear right now. First and foremost, none of the footage for this video is my own. The main gameplay used is from a YouTube channel called Toad in the Hole. Their playthrough of Pokémon X is the main A-roll we will see in this video, and then other bits and pieces are from other various channels, with specifics in the description below. Second, I want to make it clear that this video is an opinion piece. As such, while I will sometimes use evidence to back up my opinion, that doesn't change the fact that it is still an opinion, and therefore subjective. This video is not some long-winded speech about why you absolutely must like Pokémon X. Instead, it's a long-winded speech about why I like Pokémon X. If you disagree with me, that is absolutely fine, and I have no intentions of insulting you either way. This is just my opinion, this is just my passion, and I just want to share it. With that, let's actually get into the video. Pokémon X starts with the standard opening for a Pokémon game. You get a short expo dump about the basics of what Pokémon are and what the world is like, outlining the utopia level of coexistence between humans and Pokémon. You usually get this info from a professor of the Pokémon game that you play. In Pokémon X, you get this information from this game is off to a great start. You move to your new home in Vanaville Town, and are immediately acquainted with your neighbors Callum if you choose the female option, and Serena if you choose the male option, and of course, Shauna. And they become your rivals throughout the game. In my case, I'm picking the female character option because gender is a myth, so Callum will be my rival. Again, this is pretty standard, but the game takes a twist. Instead of these two people being your only friends and rivals, which is usually the standard number of rivals for a Pokemon game, Callum and Shauna then introduce you to their friend group, consisting of the two of them, Torino and Trevor. While I will admit none of the rivals in this game are as good as the rivals in Gen 3, 7, or even 8, I do like this as a starting point. The existence of a prior friend group that you are then introduced to helps flesh out the world even more so than other games. It truly feels like Vanderbilt Town was just a town that existed before you got there, and you are adding yourself to the world instead of being the center of it. Additionally, while I didn't relate to it at the time, I relate to it now because the only reason why I have the friends that I do now is because I met one of the people in the previously existing friend group and was then brought into said group. While none of the rivals in this game are spectacular in the game, Serena is the best traveling companion Ash has ever had in the anime, so it all balances out. Argue with a wall, I am right, la 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 la, I cannot hear you. When you meet the group, you are given two things. Firstly, you're given the option to pick a nickname for yourself that your friends will sometimes call you by. I'ma be real, even in 2014, I thought this was kinda cringe. Like, it's cute and all, but it just doesn't land for me. I'm already picking a name for myself at the start of the game, so why would I have a second choice lined up? Anyways, pointless complaining aside, you then get your starter Pokemon. I personally always pick Froakie because that's what 10-year-old me thought was the coolest, and it's what 19-year-old me thinks is still the coolest. Shauna will always pick the starter weakest to yours, in my case she picked Fennekin because she is dumber than a sack of rocks, and Callum will always pick the starter strongest against yours, both out of process of elimination and because he's actually intelligent. Trevor and Torino don't pick any Pokemon because they were already trainers before the start of the story. After 2 quick battles that run you through the type matchups, you embark on your journey. What's cool is that at the start of your journey, you actually venture into the nearby forest with your friends. They are actually present in the world, and it adds to the bond you forge with them. While I've heard people say that this opening in Pokémon X is hand-holdy, yeah, it's Pokemon, that's what they do. That isn't to write off the criticism completely, of course, and that's actually one of the things that I like about Pokemon Sword. They actually cut a lot of the fat off of their intro. That said, I feel it's unreasonable to call Pokemon X out on a trend that they neither popularized nor did any worse than any of the other Pokemon games, especially not in comparison to Gen 7, holy god. After leaving the forest together, you arrive in Santaloon City, where your first gym is. The gym is themed around bug types, and is led by a bug-type photographer named Viola. Each gym usually has a puzzle or maze that you have to go through, but this one boils down to, look gang, we can move in 8 directions now instead of 4! Jokes aside, it's themed well with taking place on a web, and it's a little flex for the improvements in design, so I give it a pass. Since the first gym is themed around bug types, people who pick Fennekin will have the easiest time. People who pick Froakie will have an average time, and people who pick Chespin have an even harder time than they already were having when they chose to pick Chespin/J. Thankfully, the prior routes in Forest have plenty of catch opportunities ranging from flying types like Pidgey and Fletchling to even Pansear of all Pokemon. After clearing the gym, you receive your first of 8 badges, which are your tickets of entry to the Pokemon League Championship in late game, a TM, and outside the gym you receive the XP share. I'd like to take this time to point out a gripe I have with modern day Pokemon game criticism. I find that people will say that newer games are too easy. While I don't think this is necessarily true, especially not after Pokemon Ultra Sun, I do think Pokemon should give in-game options for making the game more challenging. People already have an unofficial hard mode called the Nuzlocke Challenge, where you can only catch 1 Pokemon per route, and if a Pokemon faints, it is considered dead. And it has a lot of similarities to other permadeath settings in other JRPGs. While I don't think Pokemon should have this exact flavoring, since having your pets and companions and friends die might be a hard pill to swallow for some people, I do think having additional options or settings could be a nice change to satisfy all parties. Take modern games like Baldur's Gate 3 for example, which allows you to set the rate at which you get money, experience, and the difficulty of AI. If Pokémon had features like that, I feel like it would be more accessible to people who want more of a challenge. That said, while Pokémon does not give you a hard mode, it does give you an easy mode in the form of the XP share. Starting in Pokémon X, the EXP share is a key item instead of a held item, and it shares EXP across all Pokémon. This means that if you want to do less grinding and have an easier time in general, you can have the EXP share do more of the heavy lifting. That said, if you want a harder difficulty, you can turn the EXP share off. I see people lament the fact that Pokémon now gives you an easy mode, but I don't think that they realize that it is an optional easy mode. An optional easy mode that, if you turn it off, makes the game a decent challenge in my experience. Anyways, soapbox aside, let's get back to the story. On the outskirts of the city, you are directed to go up the route to meet Dexio and Sina. The duo are the research assistants to Professor Sycamore. They were sent to escort you to the professor's office in Lumio City. At this point, I would like to talk about the 3D world of Kalos. I mean 3D in the sense of graphics and detail, because Lumio City is perhaps the biggest example of Kalos' abundance of detail. I have been very lucky and fortunate to have had many trips to multiple parts of Europe, including France, and the more world I explore in Pokémon X, the more detail I spot that correlates to Western European architecture and design. While Lumio City is the biggest, tallest, and most Parisian example of this, what with this very clearly being the Eiffel Tower, but the brick-laid paths of the towns, the many castles and palaces and cathedrals, and the general atmosphere reminds me of my trips even without stepping outside the US. At the moment, most of the city is closed off due to power outages, so we are pretty streamlined for the time being, but we will explore this much more, much later. At Sycamore's lab, we have a short fight with him where he uses a team of 3 Pokémon. The Pokémon are fairly obscure, so you'll forgive me if I don't elaborate on them too much. What the scallop?! After your fight against Professor Sycamore and his trio of Kanto starters, he lets you choose one of them to keep. Along with the starter you pick, you also get a Megastone for their final evolutionary phase. This is used as your first hook into Mega Evolution, something to get you excited for the future, and it works for me. While Lucario will always be the first Pokemon you Mega Evolve, more on that later, getting to pick one of your Mega Evolutions from a trio of iconic Pokemon is the best thing the game could have done to entice you into the story and lore of Mega Evolutions. Strangely, none of your other rivals pick a Kanto starter, so you're the only one with one of them. This is honestly a missed opportunity, given the fact that the rivals have a free slot on their team, now and later, but that's just a nitpick. After this gift, you encounter a very normal man. Look at him. He's so regular. You can tell by the way he's wildly designed that he is completely average and unimportant.
Yep.
Apparently, he created the Holocaster, which is the stand-in for phones in this universe, and that he wants to make the world as beautiful as possible. That's so nice of him. I'm glad that he seeks to improve the world and make it better for all people to live. I'm not continuing this bit. He's the leader of Team Flare, but I'll get into Lysandre later. And yes, it is Lysandre, not Lysander, not Lysandre, Lysandre. It's French people, not unknown soup. After getting shown how to make the Pokemon equivalent of a vine, you have a cafe meeting with Callum, Lysandre, they just happen to be here, and the current champion, Diantha. Diantha is a movie star, which is another great piece of theming, because it both plays into the game's themes of beauty, the Holocaster that Lysandre is responsible for, and is also a great foil to Lysandre. Lysandre asks her if she would like to remain young forever, so she can continue to play the roles that she did in the past, but Diantha rejects these notions, saying that she would grow discontent if she had to do the same thing over and over. Everything changes. I want to live and change like that too. Lysange insists that being beautiful is essential to her job, and that Lysange can't stand to see things get uglier. Keep this scene in mind for later. After this meeting, you continue west to Route 5, where you meet Karina. Karina is a fighting-type gym leader based around roller derby. Oh, I forgot to mention, you got roller skates earlier. They are basically just faster, more fluid running shoes. They're fine. We meet Karina and her two Lucarios, and one of them takes a shine to us. Yes, that plays exactly how you think it does, given that I just said that Lucario is always our first Mega Pokémon. Afterwards, you go to the nearby Camphor town and visit Chabonneau Castle to learn about Mega Evolution. You learn nothing. That's not a joke. The dude just straight up doesn't know what Mega Evolution is. This is both mildly funny and an indication of how unknown Mega Evolution is. It's still a relatively unexplored phenomena, and it makes you feel special for knowing what it is, even in the vaguest senses at the moment. The scene is interrupted by a town member telling the castle keepers that the Snorlax that blocks the road is back. This is one of many examples where Pokemon X pays tribute to the original Pokemon Red and Blue. Between this, the Kanto starter you got earlier, and the Mewtwo cave near the end of the game that is inaccessible until you beat the Elite Four, this game takes special care to both establish its own identity as the first 3D Pokemon game, while still paying respect to the first 2D Pokemon game, and the first Pokemon game in general. We have to go to Parfum Palace to get the Pokeflute in order to wake up Snorlax so that we can proceed to the next city. In my opinion, this segment of the game is easily the weakest. It was basically just a prolonged fetch quest to move Snorlax while also dealing with an obnoxious noble's obnoxious dog. That said, it does end with a nice moment with Shauna and you watching fireworks. And if this is the weakest part of the game, I'm glad it's out of the way nice and early. Plus, it's nice to see the statues of the Gen 5 legendaries, and it's a good flex for the 3D graphics. And seeing the topiaries of Solrock and Lunatone were nice nods to the next game in the series, as well as the next generation's theme. We wake the Snorlax up, fight it, and proceed to the next town. Before entry, you and Callum face off against Torino and Trevor. I really like this moment because double battles are usually reserved for when you and an ally fight the evil team, but since that we have more of a friend group now, we get to fight each other. I really like this because it adds to the friendly yet competitive nature we all share. While some rivals are actively going against you or even downright mean to you, and that can be fun, having more friendly relationships is also good in my opinion, even if my Discord chat logs would infer otherwise. Upon entering the town and checking out the nearby fossil restoration lab to ask about ancient stones, which is to say to ask about Mega Evolution, you are sent to the Glimmering Cave to find the head scientist. On the way there is a route where you have to control riding on a ride-on in order to cross. While it doesn't control that great and it's for a short period of time, it's still a nice prelude to fully rideable Pokemon that Pokemon Sun and Moon would use instead of HMs. Inside the cave, it is here where we have our first encounter against Team Flare. Oh boy. Okay, let's talk about it. Team Flare is a contentious evil team, to say the least. A lot of people consider Team Flare to be incredibly shallow and weak as a result. And to that, I just have to say, yeah. Yes. They are very, very shallow, and that is the point. Team Flare's motivations revolve around reshaping the world based on their ideals of stereotypical beauty, class, and social status, all of which are aspects and elements that are inherently shallow. Barring the fact that you aren't supposed to side with any given evil team in Pokemon, having such an unequivocally evil team that also mirrors real-world classism and bigotry is a nice change of pace for a Pokemon game. I find it very similar to the state of Disney villains, where they stuck to doing overly complex twist villains for so long that people actually wanted a return to simple, flat-out villainy with no sympathetic strings attached. In a similar way, especially after Team Galactic and Plasma, which are both entirely based around ideology and Pokepolitics, having a return to form with an obtusely evil team was nice in retrospect. the leader of this evil team, Lysandre, is the CEO of the company that made the Holocaster, aka the holographic phone. One of the biggest criticisms that phones have had is their tendency of social media projecting unrealistic social and beauty standards upon youth. We saw this earlier in-game with the cafe conversation with Diantha. Lysandre is resistant to change and insists that Diantha and things in general need to be beautiful in order to be successful. This sentiment is unfortunately echoed in real life, in film industries, and even in gaming, with graphics playing a large role of what constitutes a good game. The thing is though, how something looks does not indicate its quality. To use real-life examples, let's look at animated movies. Elementals is, by all accounts, one of Pixar's best-looking films to date, but its acclaim does not reflect such. Conversely, in the same year, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem came out, a movie with a noticeably rough, gritty, and at times downright ugly art style. Despite this, it gave us one of the best adaptations of TMNT to date, and its acclaim reflects such. Beauty is not inherently indicative of quality. What makes this team so easy to hate is the fact that they are objectively wrong in their ideology, and I think that is a strength, not a weakness. If a game came out today where your main villain is the ambiguous upper-class society, with the final boss being a techno-bro CEO who views unproductivity as ugly and insists on everything being perfect and pretty without thinking of actual substance, it would probably be considered too on the nose and toothless. But this came out over a decade ago when the topics were still fresh. The conversation around graphics persists, but thankfully most of the attitude has shifted to reflect the sentiment that graphics don't mean everything. And while the problems around social media weren't as prevalent or exacerbated back in 2013, it's still a really compelling theme that has aged like wine, in my opinion. Pokémon has more grounded evil teams, like Team Rocket, Star, and my favorite evil team of all time, Team Skull. And Pokémon has more elaborate and outlandish teams, like Team Magma, Aqua, and Plasma. I think Team Flare fits a very nice middle ground in between those two categories. While all of the other evil teams that I've mentioned have left more lasting and iconic impressions, I would argue Team Flare serves as a great period piece and an easy standout among evil teams. I think Team Flare deserves credit for what it does and what it is, and I believe it deserves its flowers as much as any other evil team. Any evil team that isn't named Macrocosmos, that is. Like, seriously, what the hell was Sword and Shield thinking? Get these games away from the stove. They are not cooking shit. Anyways, after this encounter with Team Flare, you are either given the Jaw Fossil, which will turn into Tyrant, or the Sail Fossil, which will turn into Amora. I always pick the Jaw Fossil because, why the hell wouldn't I? You then go to Silage City, where you meet Rant, Rock-type, Rock Climber, Gym Leader. He immediately gives you the HM for Strength. I don't like how Pokemon X does HM distribution. In other games there is a clear and consistent flow to story progression in HMs, because in a way, HMs are just TMs that let you progress through the plot. Rant immediately gives you strength the millisecond he meets you and then just leaves. It doesn't make sense. This isn't an isolated incident either. You get the HM for cut in the Hedge Maze section from earlier, but you don't get it from anyone. It isn't even used in the puzzle, it's just plopped down in another corner of the map. In a game that I previously praised for its detail, how it handles HMs just feels lazy. Anyways, the gym is interesting, and Grant is a good fight, since Fennekin is fully countered by Grant's team, and Froakie and Chespin are only neutral against Grant's Tyrant. After the fight, you embark northward to Geosinge Town. We fight a horde of Team Flare grunts, and we attempt to follow one, but they disappear at a dead end. This is one of the few instances of a town's nameplate being memorable for me. Each town and city throughout Pokemon has a nameplate with a slogan, and the slogan for Geosinge Town is, "Quiet stones speak volumes." I always found that to be really cool foreshadowing, even if it is a bit simple. Most times I've played Pokemon, I've ignored the nameplates since the name of the town is always just displayed in a little blurb on the screen, so to reward players for actually paying close attention is appreciated. After this, we have our second encounter with Karina and her 2 Lucarios. She offers to battle us with her 2 Lucarios since one of them has a particular interest in us. When we win the fight, she invites us over to her gym in Shallower City for our third, but not final, fight. On our way over, we get a holo message from Sycamore that Shallower City has a Mega Evolution expert at the Tower of Mastery. When you arrive, you are greeted by Torino and Trevor. Torino gives you an intriguing stone that might just be a Mega Stone. I will say it's nice that we don't experience the story with the same partners all throughout. Having intermittent meetings with Shauna, Callum, and Torino and Trevor makes the game feel more realistic to me. You aren't always going to interact with the same people day in and day out, and it's something small that I appreciate. The 3 of you go see the expert, and after a short introduction, the expert asks you about the stone that Torino gave you 50 seconds ago. While it doesn't have any build-up, I like how Torino will insist that you found it even though you just got it from him. Torino is a pro. That said, the stone is just an ordinary rock.
Shit.
Outside the room, Callum and Shauna arrive, so the 5 of you are all together. While together, the expert exposits about Mega Evolution, talking about its power, its requirement of a catalyst in the form of a Megastone, and the necessity for trust between the trainer and Pokémon. The expert then says he would like to give each of us a Mega Ring, but can't because he only has one, again citing how little research has progressed for Mega Evolution. Torino passes since he doesn't want to focus on battling, Shauna does the same, Trevor wants to complete the Pokédex first, and that just leaves Callum and ourselves, meaning that there's only one way to decide who gets it. A battle. We win the battle, and in the meantime, while the expert gets the Mega Ring prepared, we fight through Karina's gym. It's based off of a roller derby rink, and as such there are pipes to grind on and ramps to use as ramps, and a general atmosphere that's just fun to be in. I do think it's a little weird how the distinctly American sport is in what is an obvious stand-in for France. I couldn't find any significant ties between these two, but it's not like the sport doesn't exist in France, so I'm willing to give it a pass. The final fight is fun and decently challenging, but weirdly enough she doesn't use a Lucario. Weird. After the battle, you go back to the Tower of Mastery to get your Mega Ring, but Karina has one last test for you atop the tower. As you travel up the tower, you learn that Lucario is said to be the first Mega Evolution observed by people, and given that one of Karina's Lucarios has taken interest in us, you can see where this is going. She gives us both our Mega Ring and a Lucario for a one-on-one fight. It's narratively strong, distinct, and an even fight, and a great way for us to start using Mega Evolution. Even if this fight is admittedly short, given that you can two-shot the other Lucario with 2 power-up punches, it's still a standout moment in the game for me. Now that we have access to Mega Evolutions, we are able to continue our journey back east towards Lumio City with a stop in Comarine City. But Callum has one last thing to say to us first. I sure hope he doesn't just say, "Here, take this," and throw an HM at us with absolutely no prompting. Okay, bud, listen, you are not helping me here. I genuinely like this game's writing, but you are fucking me on this. Get your act together, please. I'll talk about it more in the next episode in the 3-part series, but in Mega Ruby, the HM distribution was very intentional and thoughtful. To compare apples to apples, in Omega Ruby, you clear through the first 5 gyms on half of the map, and the other 3 of them, as well as the other half of the map, are inaccessible unless you have Surf. So, after beating the normal type gym leader, who is your father, he gives you Surf as a token of support to help you through your journey.
I can't believe how stupid I am!
In Pokemon X, you get Surf just because. There's no particular reason why now all of a sudden you have to have it, so you getting it just feels cheap and frankly, lazy. Pokemon X isn't ruined by this pattern, but it's certainly not helped by it either. Even though it's one of my favorite games ever, it still has its flaws. After using Surf and going through the ranch with Rideable Skidoo, which is always fun and cheerful, you get to Cormarine City, where Callum faces you outside of the gym. That said, in order to get to the gym, you have to go up the monorail to the other part of the city. In the monorail station, you encounter Professor Sycamore and Diantha. You have a short talk about Mega Evolution, and Professor Sycamore has something to give to you. I sure hope it's not another HM that the player receives out of the blue.
Are you out of your goddamn mind?
Whatever! Fuck it, we have Fly now, I guess. Why does this game have genuinely interesting writing and themes, and then just turns its brain off when it comes to HMs? I don't get it. We get to the gym and Callum fights us. He wants us to use Mega Evolution in battle, since we got the Mega Ring and not him. After you win, you are free to either fight the gym, or grind a little in the desert south of the city. Quick anecdote, I never used the dowsing rods in general in this game, so when I was first playing this game when I was 10, I actually got stuck in this desert because I couldn't find Team Flare's keycard when it was directly in front of me this entire time. All of this to say I was not the brightest kid. Inside the gym, there's a rope singing course that always reminded me of this section of the Mall of America that I used to play at growing up. The gym is decent. Ramos has comically large scissors, which is delightful, and this gym is a nice last stop before we finally revisit Lumio City. Now that we are halfway through the gyms, I have a ranty side tangent I want to get into. I feel like people rag too hard on Pokemon X for being too easy. On my most recent playthrough for this video, even with the EXP share on, there were times when I needed to grind to get up to the level cap of other trainers, and this isn't a case of me skipping trainers or what have you. In the first gym, you're expected to go from level 5 to level 12 in order to be on level with the gym leader. The next gym, you have to be level 25. Skipping ahead a ways, even though none of the gyms have more than 3 Pokemon, a trend started by Gen 5, by the way, the last gym in the game has Pokemon with levels as high as 59. Just for reference, in terms of final gym battles, not counting rematches in later game, Giovanni peaks at level 55 in Yellow, Claire peaks at level 41 in Heart Gold Soul Silver, Wallace peaks at level 46 in Oras, Volkner peaks at level 50 in Platinum, Drayden peaks at 43 in Black and White, Marlin peaks at level 55 in Black 2, White 2, Gen 7 doesn't have gyms, so they don't count, Raihan peaks at level 48 in Sword and Shield, and Grusha peaks at level 48 in Scarlet and Violet. Statistically speaking, Pokemon X starts playing around most other games' endgames in between the 6th and 7th gym, and this is even before Gen 8 introduced EXP candies and raid battles. Pokemon is always going to be simple due to its nature as a child-friendly game franchise, but to rag on Pokemon X for being easier than other games in the series is neither fair nor accurate. Alright. Back to it. In my opinion, after the 4th gym, at the midway point of the game, is when the story really starts to go from mostly good to actually great. On our way to the desert, we get a message from Lisange complimenting us for gaining access to Mega Evolution. He says that with this power we can steer the future into a better direction, and how we can't just cover up the old filth with the new. I always found this scene vaguely disgusting. What does he mean by filth? To this day, I don't think I have a solid answer, and it just bothers me. We also have a meeting with Dexio and Cena. Remember them? They're investigating the cause for the Lumio City power outages in the desert at the nearby power plant. The nearby power plant has one of the best songs in the entire Pokemon X soundtrack, which is saying something because this game has one of the better soundtracks in the series, in my opinion. The Kalos power plant theme, the Xerneas Yveltal fight theme, the Elite Four fight theme, the Champion fight theme, and the Lisange fight theme are some of the biggest standouts in the soundtrack to me. Surprise, surprise, the power outage is Team Flare's fault, siphoning off power from the nearby power plant for something. We don't know what yet. but it has to be big if it requires this much power. After we clear out the grunts and the first Team Flare admin, Alina, we meet Dexio and Cena, dressed as Sentai protagonists. Okay then, we exit the plant to head south to the now powered up Lumio City, where we are stopped by... Oh, hello. Okay, now we're cooking. Shauna meets us in Lumio City, and the two of you watch Prism Tower light up, a satisfying payoff to all your work and an instance where you truly feel like you have sway over this world, instead of just nebulously helping the people. Here, you had a clear, definitive impact on the world for the better, and no one can deny or twist it. You also meet Clement, the gym leader of the city, and his sister Bonnie, both of whom are traveling companions in the anime. When the cutscene finishes, you can either go straight to the gym or explore the city. You can find many of the shops, the Lysange Cafe that totally isn't suspicious, no sorry Bob, a Pokemon Ghost Girl sighting which always freaked me the fuck out as a kid, and more. As far as I know, this is the only instance in Pokemon history where there's a city where people actually walk in and out of shops and buildings. It's a really nice touch that makes the city feel alive, and it's one of my favorite areas in the game because of that. There's more. Turns out that the tower you powered is also the gym of the city, and is by far one of the coolest settings for a gym in the series. God, it feels so good to get back to complimenting this game! The gym has no puzzles or traversals, and instead it has a series of simple quizzes to solve, given by Bonnie. Each floor has 3 options, and the trainers fight you before the answer is given. This means that there's the potential to fight as many as 12 trainers in total. At the end, you fight Clement, which is a fairly solid fight, assuming your dumbass 10-year-old self didn't get stuck in the desert and power level beyond what is normal at this point in the story. Dumbass! What I like is that while there was a desert with plenty of ground types just before this battle, each are soft-countered in a way. Amalga handles the pure ground types, Dedenne handles Gabite, and so does Magneton to an extent, and it's just more complicated than just having a team of straight electrics against straight grounds. And that is a compliment to the Pokemon type system as a whole. After the gym, we go to Lysange's money laundering his cafe. Right. Also, small nitpick, I know it's not exactly subtle that Lysange is leading Team Flare, but having a grunt right outside his cafe...
That's too much, man!
At the cafe, you, Professor Sycamore, and Lysange talk about Mega Evolution, with Lysange wishing he could use it for himself. We also learned that Lysange is descended from a royal family in Kalos Old, dating back 3,000 years. Lysange discusses how he wants to be the kind of person who gives back to the people. An interesting note, given the fact that he's already taken so much. He recounts about an ancient weapon that, when used, caused great destruction. In Pokemon Y, this is because it's powered by the literal death god Yveltal, but I think Pokemon X is more interesting. In Pokemon X, the ancient weapon grants immortality instead of causing death. So when the weapon was used on soldiers, they became their own weapons of destruction, since they were unkillable. It's a neat bit of flavoring that I really appreciate, and it will tie in later with immortality being a curse, not a blessing. For listening to the tale of the old cruel king of Kalos, and how he was reprehensible and just took what he wanted, Lysange gives us a King's Rock, an item that grants every physical move the chance to flinch. This isn't important, I just want to use this moment as a vehicle to shit on Pokemon X's distribution of HMs even more, because that is how you tie in a story to your item distribution, you motherfucker! You continue to the east, where you meet up with Callum and Trevor. It's been a while since you've had a rival battle, so Callum challenges us to one now. You might be wondering, why aren't you discussing much of the dialogue of the rivals? Well, frankly, that's because they basically boil down to, Callum wants to battle you. Shauna is stupid and just made a new memory. Torino says some homie is dissing your fly girl, so you have to give him one of these. and Trevor wants to complete the Pokédexes. That's it. They have distinct personalities, so they get credit for that, but they aren't doing enough to break the mold in my opinion, and they can often be pretty one-note. They're fine, just not that interesting after a while. Personally, going off of base game, Trevor is my favorite, given that he's still competing with you, just in a way that's different to what we're used to. There are no consequences to losing to him, but still, you want to beat him, and that's what I like. If we were to include the anime, however, Serena sweeps, no goddamn contest. We head north with all of our friends except Callum to visit a haunted house. It's not that important, and it's not even the scariest moment in the game, but it's still a nice bonding moment for the four of us. Honestly, if the rivals had better, more fleshed out personalities and backstories, the constant side moments with them would hit way more, and the story of the game would be even better for it. When you get to the city, you can challenge the fairy-type gym, and at this point, this is probably one of the harder gyms in the game. The gym is themed around what I can only guess is a dollhouse, and you have to navigate the teleporter pads to get to the final area. If you don't have a good memory, this section is hard. Let me rephrase. If you're me, this section is hard. The fight itself is also rather tricky.
Greninja and Chestnut are both hard countered, and while Lucario seems like an obvious answer, Valerie still has options because Fairy is neutral against Lucario, and at this point Lucario doesn't have access to many steel-type moves.
After the gym battle, you are invited to visit the nearby Pokeball factory. This is another setting that I really enjoy because it shows an aspect to the Pokemon universe we haven't seen before. The closest we've gotten to is the Silph building, which was more so a corporate office for the company who happens to manufacture goods. Here, we actually get to see the goods being manufactured. The five of you visit the factory and find that it's being raided by Team Flare. They're trying to get as many Pokeballs as possible, of the highest quality possible, but it's unclear for what. At the end of the factory gauntlet, you find the factory president being threatened by more Team Flare admins. Additionally, he's offered protection and the chance to become a member of Team Flare for a small loan of 5 million Pokedollars. This reinforces what I said earlier about Team Flare basically just being the fascist upper class, because in USD that is about $50,000. When he refuses, the admins elect to steal what they can before blowing up the factory. When we clear out the admins, we are given the Master Ball. Usually the Master Ball is given after a gauntlet of the evil team, but it's usually at the end of an evil base. Getting the highest quality Pokeball from the place where they make Pokeballs is much more preferable to me because it's more so set as a tangible reward for hard work and protecting people instead of you just stealing it from the base. When you get to the next town, Professor Sycamore meets with you and discusses the game's legendary with you. In my case, Xerneas. They remark that when they aren't needed, they enter a dormant state in an unknown location, and that the last sighting of them was thousands of years ago. In town, Trevor asks for our help in Frost Cavern to help with his Pokédex entries. Of course, given the Pokemon formula, if someone invites you somewhere, the evil team is also likely to be there too. Lo and behold, Yep. Team Flare is trying to catch an Obama, a Pokemon capable of Mega Evolution. Either they want to catch it to learn more about Mega Evolution, or, if that backfires, it can create a powerful snowstorm which can also be an asset. Regardless, you beat it, you free it, and you move on from it. You head east to Route 17 with a section where you have to ride a Mamoswine through the least amount of snow in a Minnesotan winter. And afterwards, you get to Anastar City. Again, slow and slightly jank controls aside, it's nice to see another section with rideable Pokemon given that Sun and Moon would fully embrace this aspect. We arrive in Anastar City, my favorite city in the game, and one of my favorites in the entire series. Between the soundtrack, architecture, the massive crystal sundial, and the fact that this is where the endgame story really takes off, all of it just culminates in one of the most nostalgic and ethereal cities in my opinion. We fight Callum outside the gym, clear the cool as hell gym that takes place in this outer space setting with you walking on constellations, my god! And once you win, you have your 7th gym badge. From here, you can embark for the 8th and final Never mind! We fly over to Lumio City, go to his fuck-ass excuse for a hideout, and from there, we get a Pokemon staple, the Evil Team Lair. The Evil Lairs are late-game dungeon-like gauntlets of grunts, admins, and a battle with the evil leader, all while you slowly uncover more and more of the evil team's plan. Except this time, Dexio and Cena are here, so that's how you know this one's peak. Usually the lair has the Master Ball at the end, but given that we already got it from the vastly more unique and memorable location of the Pokeball Factory, we're set on that part. Team Flare's lair is great, with it starting with a battle with Lissange, who has a team of pre-evolved Pokemon like Mienfoo, then revolves around us finding a key card to chase after him further into the laboratory, and ending off with you finding AZ captured below in the labs. We are given AZ's lore, recounting how his Pokemon fought in the Great War, was killed, and so he made the ultimate weapon to bring his Pokemon back and grant it eternal life. However, still angry and rageful, he then turned the weapon on humanity and used it to end the war, resulting in so much death in the process. The Pokemon that he brought back, the Pokemon that he loved with all of his heart, abandoned him after the carnage, and he has spent every moment since then recollecting and trying to find the Pokemon that he loved so much that abandoned him. See, when this game sets its mind to it, it can deliver on some really compelling storytelling. AZ's story is heartbreaking and a standout in all of Pokemon. In concept and universe, Pokemon are magical friends, so to see someone so attached to their friend that they would be willing to raise the world in their name for their justice is something that has always struck a chord with me. We follow Lissange deeper into the labs and we find Lissange and a scientist. All of the prep work for Team Flare's world domination is complete, and we are given a choice. After being the scientist, we are given a red button and a blue button to press. One will activate the weapon, and one will disarm it. If we select the correct button, the scientist presses the arming button anyways, removing any autonomy that Lissange tried to place on us. We are then shown a monitor of Geocinch Town, where it's revealed that it was the site for the ultimate weapon all along. Quiet stones speak volumes. The weapon blooms outward like a flower and starts charging up in order to raise the world once again. We fly over, fight a few grunts, and make our way below into a secret passage in order to put a stop to this conflict once and for all. We find Lissange in the process of reviving a petrified tree-like object. He says that soon, everything will belong to Team Flare, and everything will be beautiful. He points out that without him, people will always be in conflict with one another, citing the scientist who backstabbed you minutes ago, and going as far back as the Tower of Mastery. See, the player didn't share the Mega Ring. We fought a rival for it, and then we took it as a spoil of war. When there is one of something, it cannot be shared. When something cannot be shared, it will be fought over. And when something is fought over, some must survive without it. The only way to create a world where people live in beauty, a world without conflict or theft, is to reduce the number of living things. We then see something unexpected. We see Lissange cry. With this weapon, Lissange plans to wipe out all Pokemon because they will inevitably become tools for war and theft. Lissange proves his point swiftly by forcing us into a battle. He brings out a team consisting of his team in the cafe, except evolved. No sooner do we defeat Lissange do we learn that it's too late. Xerneas is already awakening. We fight through a massive horde of Team Flare grunts and admins with the help of Callum and Shauna. This section is easily one of the hardest sections in the game. The battles themselves aren't that hard, but you are bound to take at least a few hits per battle. The fact that there are so many fights with no given healing points, purely reliant on the user's inventory of healing items, it results in a gauntlet that is equivalent to a death by 1,000 paper cuts. You have to keep up on healing before you even take on Xerneas or Lissange, back to back. Speaking of which, we're too late. The army of Team Flare was able to stall for long enough. We watch in as much amazement as horror as Xerneas is resurrected in all of their glory, and they do not disappoint. We are brought into one of the coolest arenas in the game to fight Xerneas. Or maybe not. Xerneas is a wild Pokemon. While we can't run, we don't have to defeat it. We could opt to catch it. It's risky and low probability, but we can try. Unless, of course, we save the Master Ball from the factory. In which case, we have the answer to the fight. We either catch or defeat Xerneas, the life Pokemon, and bring an end to Lisange's plot. But Lisange isn't going to take this defeat sitting down. When there is one of something, it cannot be shared. And when it cannot be shared, it will be fought over. Lisange, wearing a suit designed to drain the energy of Xerneas to put back into the machine, fights us again. Ironically, in the pursuit of making the most beautiful world possible, we see the ugliest version of himself yet. We are brought back into a fight with a fully healed team against Lisange, and we learn something awful. Somehow, Lisange was able to recreate Mega Evolution, and Mega evolves his Gyarados. Why is this awful? Because on top of needing the material components for Mega Evolution, one must also have a bond of trust with the Pokemon set to Mega Evolve. This means that Gyarados trusts his master, Lisange. This means that either Lisange is a hypocrite and will keep his Pokemon, his tools of war and theft for himself, or Lisange is a man of his word and plans to follow through on his plan to eliminate all Pokemon after E1, including his Gyarados. And frankly, I don't know which one's worse. Regardless, we cannot let Lisange see his plans through. With the power of Xerneas, we have to stop him. After the fight, Lisange rigs the weapon to blow. In Pokemon Y, he sets the weapon to trigger and kill everyone in the building. But in X, it's the opposite. We've seen the husk of a person AZ has become, pursuing the same obsession for thousands of years. We know that immortality of that caliber is not the blessing one might think. It's a curse. I wouldn't want to live forever, unchanging and passionless. Everything changes. I want to live and change like that too. We escape the weapon before it can alter us, and the weapon is destroyed in the process, never to be used again. The ensuing destruction causes the nearby land to collapse, sealing Lisange under the rubble for eternity. He may live forever, but he will always be surrounded in dirt and filth. A fitting, almost biblical end to what is the leader of one of the most underrated evil teams in the series. We check in with our friends Dexio and Cena, and when we finally have a moment to breathe, we have a talk with AZ. He recounts the story we heard in Lisange's lab, only with more context and emotional connection about the aftermath of AZ's actions. He regrets his decisions immensely, and laments how he and his Pokemon are now endlessly wandering, and he wonders what he has to do to make it all right before leaving. Whenever I tell people my favorite Pokemon game is Pokemon X, I always get the same rebuttals. But what about Team Flare? But what about the writing? To both of those I say,
I liked it.
I like Team Flare and I like the writing of this story. I acknowledge there's some heavy nostalgia bias at play here, and I can recognize that other games like Oras, Black and White, and even Sun and Moon have better overall evil teams and writing, but the fact that these elements were done better elsewhere does not mean that they weren't done well here. I know I am not likely to change anyone's mind on the underrated Team Flare, but that's okay. Not everything is going to be your cup of tea. That said, in my opinion, putting as much of my bias aside as I possibly can, I think that a majority of Team Flare and Pokemon X's story is done well. They aren't perfect, Lord knows they aren't, but they are still good, and in my opinion, great. Team Flare is only slightly higher than the middle of the list for me in terms of evil team placement, but Pokemon X, even if it's not as good as the series' best stories, is one of my top 3 favorites, behind Oras and Sun and Moon. That said, we aren't done yet. We are in the home stretch now. We have just one more gym, and then the final league, and then we are complete with our journey. In the next town over from Anastar City, we meet up with Professor Sycamore. He apologizes for everything Lissange did, and how it affected not just the world, but us personally. It's a really nice moment since he doesn't really have anything to apologize for. He was just as betrayed as we were, only he was actually friends with Lissange, whereas we just ran into him a few times. He also thanks us for stepping up and helping everyone, and for essentially saving the Pokemon world as we know it. He posits that humanity will grow to a point where a common interest will be so prevalent that everyone will be able to have what they need to live comfortably. He then challenges us to a battle. His trio of Kanto starters that he fought us with earlier are now all grown, just like us. When the fight is over, he informs us that there is a hidden treasure in this town. If we have a moment, he wants us to try and find it. Is it another HM that the game heaps on us for an arbitrary reason just so we have an excuse to ride up the waterfalls of the town? Well, you know, given this game's writing... No, actually. It's a message scrawled into the station's wall. To the person reading this, what are you like now? Did you become who you wanted to be? For starters, what was the person you wanted to become even like? I don't know, but it would be wonderful if you could boast that you're living each day to its fullest. To the future Sycamore, from the Sycamore dreaming of the future. If this video is releasing when I want it to, that means that I have turned 20 on the same day. And it also means that I've been a fan of Pokemon for a decade. Half of my life. Ever since I was young, I've always wanted to become a teacher. That was always the profession I wanted, and ever since I was young, every major step I have taken has been on the path to become a teacher. Every step, except this. This video, this hobby, this channel. This entire video is not something I would have even dreamed of considering 10 years ago. In my life, I've made many decisions, many mistakes, and many discoveries about myself. I am not the person I thought I would be when I was 10. But that is okay. Right now, I am someone I am proud of. I am getting my education degree. I have actual friend groups, an actual support system, and most importantly, I really like who I am right now. When I started making this video, I expected it to be a shorter analysis on a game from my childhood. I did not expect for a single, optional, inconsequential line of dialogue to make me cry. That is something magical that I cannot say about any other mainline Pokemon game. You continue south and encounter and fight Shauna, our final send-off to her character. She's by far my least favorite rival in the game. I think they really overplay her ditzy and airheaded personality, but she's still at a bare minimum passable, just a bit generic and uninteresting. You follow this up with a fight with Torino and Trevor, which are also send-offs to their character, except I'm more attached to both of them. We don't fight Callum. He's off with the Mega Guru. The friends depart, but we are given a token of appreciation and support from Shauna, the HM for Waterfall, so that we can get through the league. This isn't bad. This is good. The game, for the first time, integrated the HM in a good way. In a way, they cleared the bar and they ended on their best foot. Not a high bar, but I can't complain. When you get to Snowbell City, the final city of the game, you find that the gym leader Wolfric is in the nearby forest, so you have to track him down. When you find him, he's in a secret sanctuary for abandoned and mistreated Pokémon. He serves as a caretaker for some of the Pokémon there, and apologizes for causing the inconvenience. This area also has a cave that you can't access until you prove you're strong enough at the Elite Four. Once you clear the Elite Four and go into the cave, you find Mewtwo. This is a great callback to Pokemon Red and Blue's Mewtwo encounter, as well as good flavoring for the world of Kalos. While it's unclear what is and is not canon to the games outside of the actual games themselves, in the movies, Mewtwo becomes a protector of Pokemon who are abused and mistreated like it was. As such, having Mewtwo be found in Pokemon Village is a great extra piece of flavoring that adds to its encounter instead of just giving Mewtwo away at an event or having it in a random corner of the map because Game Freak said so. With that explored, it's time to face the final gym. Wolfric, the Ice-type gym leader, and his gym based around an ice rink. As a Minnesotan, this gym was made for me and me specifically, and the fight was also good. And it caps off our gym badge journey. You enter the tunnel to Victory Road, past what is essentially an entrance test, so you're sure you didn't steal the badges or something? I don't know. And you pass by obelisks of all of the gym badges in the region, ending with a door with the same symbols. By stepping on the platform, the symbols light up, and you are given entrance to the final gauntlet of the game. Circling back to my comments about this game's difficulty, both in a vacuum and in comparison to the other games, we are currently playing well past what most games in the series consider endgame leveling. Pokemon X Victory Road is sufficiently challenging, dynamic, and an overall great time. Near the end, you fight Callum. While he doesn't have Mega Evolution yet, he will in post-game. I cannot wait to not cover post-game. Which, yes, this means I'm not covering Looker's arc. I love this game, but I don't love it enough to actively pursue Looker content. Come on now. Anyways, back to the fight. It's a fun send-off to our most prevalent rival, and I really hope the remake gives him a personality. You arrive at the League proper, which is set in a massive castle-cathedral hybrid, with stained glass windows, high domed roofs, and this general feeling of divinity. This is the last, but one of the greater examples of French theming in this game. Europe in general is very Christian, and the architecture and art culture here resembles such. More distinctly, this area reminds me a lot of Notre Dame de France, which is the greatest and grandest cathedral in the world. This setting is really cool, and I'm so glad it got incorporated into a stage in Smash Bros. Moreover, it's one of the few stages that actually fits with competitive rules for tournaments, so that's even cooler. In the cathedral, you formally meet Malva, one of the holocast anchors you've seen before in passing. She explains the league to us, and we are left to face the 4 Elite Four members. Malva is the first in our particular order. She is a Fire-type user who, as mentioned prior, is a news broadcaster. This is an interesting pairing of Pokemon type and profession. News has a bunch of slang, like hot seat, referring to someone who's being subjected to questioning or criticism, hot mic, which refers to when mics are live, hot gossip, which refers to juicy news, and so on. Aside from those puns, I couldn't find much in regards to the connection of her job and her type matchup. Regardless, she's a pretty solid fight. Next is the Steel-type member, Wickstrom. Wickstrom is based off of a knight in armor, which, while simple, is a great theme and a great nod to medieval warfare that France took part in. He's also, in my personal experience, one of the harder members of the league. Overall, while basic, he's still fun and memorable. Next, we have Drosna. She's the dragon-type member of the Elite Four, and I couldn't find a single thing about her relating to anything French or even just European. She has lore about being descendant from scholars of Dialga and Valkia, but aside from that and her cheery personality, there isn't much to say about her. Probably my least favorite Elite Four member out of the four, but she's still passable and her fight's decent too, I guess. Last and certainly not least, we have Seabold, the water-type member of the Elite Four. He is by far one of my favorite members of not just this Elite Four, but Elite Four history in general. He's a chef, which obviously plays into French culture and the esteem of French cuisine. But unlike the chef trio from Unova, Seabold shows you immediately that this chef has the sauce. His outfit is drippy as hell, it's fitting since he's a water type user, and his team is decently strong too. He's the best, I love him, he can do no wrong, and now we're done. With the Elite Four squared away, all that is left is Diantha, the champion of the Colossus region, and the last stop on our journey. Her team, despite being led by the fairy-type Gardevoir, is actually more centered around dragon types.
Hey, wait a minute.
I really like this detail since it actively goes against what we may have expected from her. The newest type is fairy. She is based around beauty. She has a dress that has figurative angel wings on her back, and her main type is dragon? That's a small but nice subversion that I really like. Her fight is as tough as it needs to be for the final boss of the game, while still remaining fun and fair. She's no Cynthia, but she is one of my favorite champions in the series. With this fight, we are officially crowned champion. There's this quiet moment where we are led to the podium to register our champion team, where Diantha is kind and warm to us, leading us through the action of taking her place. There is no malice, only loving and accepting. There's also no music. Aside from the footsteps, dialogue boxes, and sound effects, this moment is silent. You have won, and in a way, there isn't much to add. This moment is given the weight it deserves as you prove yourself to be the best of the region. You have won. A parade is held for us a few days later, celebrating not just our recent victory, but also our progression and journey in general. All of our friends are in attendance to celebrate with you, the person who defeated Team Flare and the League. There's one other face in the crowd, AZ, watching us get our accolades and praise. The celebration is cut by an unexpected proposal. A battle. When we win, he thanks us, saying that he thanks us for setting him free from his anger. He is then greeted by someone, ascending down from the sky, as gentle as a petal on the breeze. His Floette. He falls to his knees, crying, just holding his Pokémon. The man who loved his Pokémon with all of his heart, finally made whole. And that is the end of Pokémon X. This is one of, if not my favorite Pokémon game of all time. That said, as you may have picked up, this game has some notable flaws. That said, given the fact that they are notable, that means that it's easy to diagnose and treat them for the prospective remake when Gen 12 comes out in a decade or so. For starters, as much as I ragged on them, I do genuinely believe that this game needs to do better at incorporating HMs into the story. For sake of argument, I will be referring to these changes as their HM moves, given that Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl still had HMs, but they were assigned to random overworld Pokemon instead of teamed Pokemon. It's actually pretty easy to make the HMs fit into the story better. In the Shabano Castle section, instead of commanding Shauna to stand in one place to block the path of the Furfrou, instead have the section be an actual hedge maze that we need to navigate through while using Cut to cut through the bushes to find Furfrou deep in the maze. Instead of Grant giving us Strength HM for missing a race or whatever, have him appear earlier in the game and say how if you want to clear his gym and climb the walls in his gym, you will need to get stronger and give us strength. Instead of the Tower of Mastery being accessible through shallow water, have it be our first surf section of the game, and have us get the HM out of necessity to continue the plot. These are just a few small tweaks that make the HM distribution all the better. Secondly, we need to tone down Lisandre a lot in the early game. Still have him talk about himself, his standards of beauty, and all of that, but tone down the evil music, tone down the overall menace to him, at least at the start, and have him be more subdued at the start of the game, and then ramp up as we go on. Given that it's a remake, it will be impossible to keep the mystery of him being the leader of Team Flare for most players, but this will at least create suspense and not telegraph it as heavily for any new players. Thirdly, and this may be obvious, but expand on Mega Evolution. It's kind of impossible to axe Mega Evolution out of the plot of X and Y, so bring it back and create more Megas, as well as bringing back all of the old ones. Mega Evolutions for the Gen 6 starters are essential, in my eyes, but in general I would like to see more Mega Evolutions for Gen 6 Pokemon, particularly Pyroar, Meowstic, Aegislash, Talonflame, Noivern, and Goodra, and possibly the Legendaries. This is small, but crucial given how much of the plot of Pokemon X hinges on Mega Evolutions. Fourth, expand on the rivals. I'm not asking every rival to have the complexity of Wally or Hop, but at least make them more interesting than they currently are. This is sort of an undefined task, considering the fact that just shouting, "Make the bad thing good," isn't very specific, but look at how much of a glow-up they gave Wally in Omega Ruby. They very clearly can take lackluster rivals from old games and revamp them in the remakes. It's unlikely that they can do this with every rival, but if they can at least do it with Callum, that would be great. Fifth, give the later trainers better teams. While the gym leaders in this game are decent, I think giving them a Pokemon or two to the later gyms would be nice. Moreover, I think starting at Clement, each of the gym leaders should have access to at least one Mega Evolved Pokemon, just to drive forth how powerful it can be, while still having it be fairly exclusive. I also think that the Elite Four should have a Mega Pokemon each, since they are similarly really strong and powerful, both in terms of battling and socio-political status. Lastly, and this is by far my biggest ask, but I want another Delta episode. Except with Rayquaza, this time we have Zygarde. As is, he's tucked away in a corner of the map that not many people will explore extensively, and I think a Delta episode like Epilogue, where we help Zygarde balance the ecosystem after the ultimate weapon is fired, would be a massive boon to the story and gameplay of Pokemon X.
Okay, so I recorded this part in early February. I win.
Pokemon X, in terms of gameplay, is one of the more revolutionary generations in the series, which is fitting, given that it's themed in Paris. For starters, we have the starters. For the grass types, we have... Okay, not off to a great start. We have the Chespin to Chestnut line, which evolves from a standard grass type to a grass fighting type. Next, we have the fire type starters, the Fennekin to Delphox line, which evolves from a fire type to a fire psychic type. Lastly, we have the water type starter and the crowd favorite, the Froakie to Greninja line, which evolves from a standard water type to a water dark type. While I generally appreciate Gen 3 and Gen 7 for having a more even and balanced quality amongst the starters, I still think Gen 6 has one of the better starter lines in the series. From a gameplay standing, the typings they receive help elevate the type matchup tradition of starter Pokemons even higher. In every Pokemon game, the first Pokemon you get is either a grass, fire, or water type. This is because grass, fire, water is one of the easiest type matchups for new and younger players to learn. Grass burns by fire, fire is extinguished by water, and water is absorbed by grass. It is a standard rock, paper, scissors-like matchup. Less commonly known, there is a similar type matchup triangle of fighting, psychic, dark. While the logic isn't as concrete, if we think of fighting as bronze, psychic as brains, and dark as fears, the type matchup makes a little more sense. Brains beats brawn, fears beats brain, bronze beats fear. Having a secondary type matchup perfectly aligned with their primary type matchup is a perfect way of reinforcing Pokemon's core gameplay mechanic while also allowing for more distinct design themes. The designs of each starter also help them soar above the competition. Chestnut, Delphox, and Greninja are designed to be a paladin, a wizard, and a rogue respectively, 3 common archetypes that are incredibly common in European and Euro-based fantasy stories. Given the fact that the game takes place in an area based off of Paris, the inclusion of real-life region-specific themes for each starter really adds to the design of the starters. While Greninja is often the popular pick due to its competitive viability and sheer cool factor, each of the starters plays a crucial role, and as much as I like to jab at Chestnut's line, none of them are outright bad. These factors combined solidifies to me that Gen 6 has one of the best starters in the series. They aren't the best, I personally believe that title should go to Gen 3, but luckily, I get to talk about that more when I cover the other mainline Gen 6 game. As for the other new additions to the Pokédex, we have the Talonflame line, which is easily my favorite regional bird in this series, and a decent substitute for Charizard in mid to later game. The Aegislash line is a very interesting and well-executed stance fighter Pokemon and an easy standout of the gen. Goodra and Noivern are both really solid dragon types, and each fills a role depending on if you want more defense or more speed. Sylveon is one of the best evolutions in the game, and I'm definitely not saying that because, although there are more Pokemon that are also solid, the last mons I want to talk about are the legendaries. The legendaries in any given Pokemon game are always some of the highlights of their generation, and this game is no different. Yveltal, the mascot of Pokemon Y, is themed around death, destruction, and there being a bird ties into symbolism and superstitions revolving around crows and ravens, being old, wise, and signs of ill omen, and, you guessed it, death. Zygarde, the tertiary legendary accessible in both games, is themed around the world as we know it, but not literally representing the land like Groudon does. Zygarde is intended to be the monitor of ecosystems and the arbiter between life and death, or in this case, Xerneas and Yveltal. Zygarde also has design elements harkening to Norse mythology, with its 10% form, 50% form, and 100% form being designed after Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Loki respectively. In Norse mythology, Fenrir and Jormungandr are children of Loki, and all 3 of them are associated with chaos and discord. Similarly, Zygarde exists in a constantly chaotic environment, having to watch over all living things and keep the world neutral. Lastly, we have Xerneas, the legendary Pokemon of Pokémon X. Xerneas is the antithesis to Yveltal, being associated with life and rebirth. As Yveltal has symbolism of crows and ravens, Xerneas has similar symbology to deers, which regrow their antlers every year. Moreover, deers are associated with feelings of gentleness and wisdom, and in certain Native American cultures, seeing a white deer is a sign of good fortune. Overall, each of the 3 legendaries are interesting and memorable, with Zygarde and Xerneas being my favorite, with Zygarde's ties to Norse mythology, and Xerneas' symbology and new typing. Speaking of which, one of the biggest additions competitively to Pokémon X is the addition of Fairy type. The Fairy type was introduced as a balance check for fighting and dragon type Pokemon, which dominated most of the competitive metas before Gen 6, while also giving less powerful types like Fire, Poison, and Steel more viability. Other types have Pokemon that act as representation of certain fantasy themes like mythology and fairy tales, but the Fairy type is wholly themed around them. While in Gen 6 a lot of the Fairy type boils down to they're either cute or pink so they're fairy, Later gens get really creative of making interesting mons based off of the fairy type, like the Tapu Quartet, Galarian Rapidash, Mimikyu, and Grimmsnarl, to name a few. Lastly, the biggest addition to the Pokemon series that Pokemon X made was Mega Evolutions. Up until Gen 6, the Pokemon gameplay formula was relatively stagnant. It wasn't bad, per se, but it was getting stale for many older fans of the series. So, Gen 6 decided to try something new: Mega Evolutions. Mega Evolutions are new, more powerful forms of old Pokemon that you can change into during battle. This option allows for not only more creativity in designs and theming, like finally turning Charizard into the dragon it was always meant to be, but also more gameplay variety. The caveats to Mega Evolution are that it requires the Pokemon to be holding a stone corresponding to its species, except in the case of Rayquaza, but that's an outlier. And in total, you can only Mega Evolve once per battle. This means that if you have multiple Pokemon on a team that are capable of Mega Evolution, you have more options for mix-ups and mind games against your opponent. Moreover, while Mega Evolutions in general are stronger statistically than their base forms, sometimes in cases like Gyarados that only has one weakness to Electric, it's more beneficial to keep them at their base form instead of Mega Evolving them into a new type matchup that has different and more weaknesses. In my own personal experience, while Mega Garchomp was nice, having an item that gave each of my moves a chance to flinch was just more appealing to me, but the fact that I have that option is great. Mega Evolution serves as a vital shot in the arm to Pokemon's core gameplay, and that success is directly attributed to Pokemon X. The amount and quality of additional content that Pokemon X introduces is one of the more remarkable aspects of Pokemon X. I started this series with Pokemon X, but even so, the game did a remarkable job of introducing me to old concepts. Super Training, while a fun minigame in its own right, was a great introduction to EVs and IVs. Pokemon and Me, aside from being great wordplay that I'm only just now understanding in 2024, was a fantastic introduction to friendship levels, which used to be a pretty nebulous and convoluted system that used to require a Google search to understand. The PSS, to this day, is the most non-intrusive and easy to navigate social system of any Pokemon game I've played. Lastly, now that the game is in 3D, the visual creativity is on an entirely new level. Move animations are more flashy, designs can be more elaborate without sacrificing cohesion, and you finally have enough of an avatar for meaningful customization, and for a first draft, it does a great job with just how expansive it is. The customization also plays into the theming really well, since France and the surrounding areas are known for their high fashion and cosmetic manufacturing. This game could have just introduced any of these, not elaborated, and left, but the fact that they introduced all of these, and most of them play into the region's theming, is an added bit of thoughtfulness that really pays off in my opinion. Part of the reason why I view Gen 6 in such high regard is because of the impact that it had on Pokemon as a game series. For starters, the introduction of Mega Evolution proved two things. Firstly, it proved that Pokemon, as a fan base, is widely accepting of new changes and additions to the pre-existing Pokemon formula.
Stale, you get stale.
Game Freak took this feedback, and ever since they have been trying new battle mechanics every generation. Z-moves in Gen 7 function as a souped-up, and for some Pokemon, unique moves that are incredibly powerful, but can only be used once, which incentivizes timing and strategy. Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing in Gen 8, aside from sounding like modern-day Gen Alpha slang, essentially functions as Mega Evolutions with a time limit that are accessible to all Pokemon, with a few getting special forms. Lastly, and most recently, Gen 9 introduced Terastallization, which changes your Pokemon's primary typing. My favorite additions to the Pokemon formula to this day are Megas and Terras, just for how unique and creative they were from a gameplay standpoint at the time of their release. Circling back to Megas, they also proved that the Pokemon fanbase would be open to seeing new iterations of old Pokemon, and while Megas were widely discontinued after being in the background of Gen 7, Gen 7 also introduced region-specific variants of old Pokemon, a trend that has persisted to this day in Gen 9. Pokemon X was also the first mainline Pokemon game to be in 3D. While the game definitely shows its age, and the graphics would be mostly improved in later generations, bugs, glitches, and poor hardware optimization notwithstanding, Pokemon X still deserves credit for being the foot in the door that it was, and even though the graphics aren't the best, there aren't any glaring issues in my experience in terms of optimization. Plus, the advent of 3D allowed for character customization, and that has persisted in Pokemon games to this day, which is yet another feather in Pokemon X's cap. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention just how many personal memories I have with this game. I got my 2DS and a copy of Pokemon X for my 10th birthday, a birthday that I still have a weird fixation on in terms of importance in my life. It was my first Pokemon game, and coincidentally, I got it at a time where most in-universe protagonists get their first Pokemon. I grinded through most of the game on a cross-country car ride to help my grandparents move from Arizona back to my home state of Minnesota, and then I grinded the rest of the way through when I was violently sick for the next week. To this day, I don't understand why I was that ill, but that's besides the point. Pokemon X is what got me some of my only friends in a time where I had very few. Pokemon X was what got me into the Pokemon anime, which was also my gateway into anime as a whole, and the early cartoons of my life are massive inspirations for my love of animation today. It cannot be understated just how much of my early life was shaped by Pokemon X, and the memories I have of this game are incredibly personal and valuable to me. As much as I could try, I don't think I could ever forget this game and what it did for me. As much as I love this game as it stands alone, it was also a fantastic foot in the door for my interest in Pokemon in general. While it may not be the most popular or the best Pokemon game in every aspect, its overall quality and the memories it made for me make it my favorite. I will keep its memory in an album in my heart. With that said, while most Pokemon fans consider Pokemon X to be forgettable at best, it was immediately followed up by what most Pokemon fans consider to be the best remakes in the series. More on this gem to follow.